Okay, so we have our palette here, and what we have is titanium white. Get a big dollop of that. You're going to be using a lot of that. A new color that I haven't used with you guys yet is called Pistachio. It's really this elegant cream, almost like a peridot green. And then, of course, you got your cerulean blue hue, which you've used before with me, Phthalo green, cadmium red hue, crimson, and permanent rose. Permanent rose may be another new one for us today. And we're going to use two brushes. I've got a really large brush here and a medium-sized brush. I actually use the flat brushes. That way I can use every single point in the brush. And that's just something that you'll develop preference for over time. Some people like the ones that are pointy and filberts, but I personally like the square ones so I can use every single point. And of course then you'll also need your water. I have mine in a nice plastic whole mess cup, hotty toddy. So yeah, go ahead and set up your palette and we'll get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is kind of draw in where our mason jar is going to be, and then just kind of get a feeling for where we want the flowers to be. And I'm just going to start with like the circles, and we'll take the rest from there. Then we're going to paint in the background. So let's go ahead and take your large brush. You want to get a lot of water and have paper towel handy. Getting my paper towel handy, I didn't do that. Okay. So now I'm going to take the white and the blue. And I'm just kind of mixing a little bit on my brush. Notice I have some white and blue showing on there. And I'm just going to lightly kind of draw in. Every time I do these, every one of them turns out a little bit different. So I'm going to draw in my circles. Sorry about that, I had to stand up to paint. Okay, now I'm going to start drawing in the circles of my, flowers. So I'm going to clean off my brush. Then I'm going to use the smaller brush this time to draw in my circles. So wet your brush really good. And I'm going to use some of the crimson and mix a little bit of the blue. So I actually have the two colors showing on my brush here. Now I'm going to just go ahead, and I didn't clean off my brush because I'm taking more of that alizarin crimson, and I'm going to wet my brush just a little bit and start painting in some of the flowers. And literally just brush stroking them in. Notice how I'm pulling in other colors. Right now we're just getting it drawn in, so it doesn't need to be perfect. We're just getting the basic structures in. Really have to think about how a flower is going to be positioned on the table, because it's going to be like your hand is laying on the table. The petals are going to fold up, so you got to think about where the petal is going to end up. And we'll exaggerate those a little bit more. So while I'm waiting on that to dry, I want this to dry and this to dry before I start on the background. So this is already dry for the most part, If it's not, all you have to do, take your wet paper, your dry paper towel, and suddenly it's dry. Okay, or you can take a hairdryer to it, or just stand around for 2 minutes and wait for it to dry. I'm going to switch back to my big brush. And I'm going to start adding in just a couple structural highlights so that I know where I want the light to come from. So when you think about a jar, it's a three-dimensional object. So you've got, let's say, light coming in this way, so it's going to hit here, the water, and the back of the jar. Here, back of the jar. And so you may have some light areas where it's going to blend in. And I'm just adding where I think light might hit. And where there's light, there is dark. So I took some of the darker blue, the cerulean blue, and adding a little bit structure and three-dimensional feel to our mason jar and its water. What I'm going to do is just smoothing down a little bit of the white and blending it in a little bit. So I'm not ready for all the strong highlights just yet. To blend, you can see I'm literally just dragging it and squiggling it about to get it to blend. One of the other things that's in here is you can see the stems. We're going to go ahead and place those in. So I'm wetting my big brush and I'm going to grab some of that pistachio color. That's that light green color, the very pretty green. And I'm just going to pencil it in a little bit. So we know it's going to start up here. And once it hits the water, it kind of distorts. So I'm not going to really call it out too much. Same with this one. And again, I'm just placing things in here. Okay. So we've got a really good start to our mason jar, our flowers, the stems. We've got everything placed. I need to do one more stem here. Again, I'm grabbing that pistachio and it's going to be pulled behind the vase here. Maybe I want it peeking out the other side. Okay. Grabbing some of the darker green because that's going to get lost to me in a little bit. Okay, just to call it out. Okay, now we're going to start adding in our background. This is where you're going to need that big brush, lots of water, the white, and the pistachio. So I'm grabbing the white and the pistachio, and I've got a really good dollop on my paintbrush, and I'm going to start Xing it in. Let's scooch this one to the side, because I get messy. Doesn't matter if you go over stuff. If it gets a little thick like it is right here, I'm going to add water. Okay, and while I'm down here, we know that there's darkness underneath objects to show that they're sitting, so I'm going to go ahead and grab some of that blue. It's the cerulean blue, and I'm just going to add a nice line and kind of pull it out. Okay, and clean up my brush. And I'm going to go back to the pistachio and white. This is how I'm adding a little more structure to the jar. And it's actually pulling out some of the blue, and so I'm going to blend that in. Okay, and while we're here, we're going to go ahead and paint our sides and edges too. So you can see I use a 12 by 12 gallery wrap. Gallery wrap means that you can't see the staples on the side. They're back here instead. So if you use a gallery wrap, you don't necessarily have to get it framed. Okay, good. So now my jar is dry. So the same color that I brought into the background here, I'm going to start bringing that into my mason jar. And I'm just going to add some small strokes. Remember, in some of my other paintings I talked about having a soft and a hard edge. Soft and hard edges alternating allows it to look like a three-dimensional object. So we're going to start adding a soft edge where it's kind of blending in with the background. And then you already have your hard edge established with some of the blue here. And I'm just going to pull some of the color through so I can re-establish my shapes. Now I'm going to switch to my focal point to the flowers. I'm going to switch to the smaller brush. And see how we're doing on dryness. Good. Nice thing about acrylics, it's not toxic. Whereas oil paints, you know, if you're doing this all the time with oil paints, it's not a good thing. Like, I would never rub oil paint into my fingers. This is not a problem. This is just acrylic paint, safe for kids to paint with. I actually have my daughter painting in this stuff all the time. So I'm grabbing some of that alizarin crimson and I'm going to start drawing in my flowers. Re-establish where the center is for that one. And start drawing in petals. Well, one of the things to keep in mind about drawing flowers is the composition. You're not going to see all the flowers facing you like this. Not every single one of them are going to do that unless it's a sunflower. Sunflowers follow the sun, so every single one of them are the same. But in Gerber daisies, you know, we're placing them into the jar. So the jar is really what controls where they're going. To make it interesting, we want them facing different directions so you see different parts of the flower. So here I've got one that's centered, one facing out that way, one facing out that way, and one facing up. And not every single flower petal is going to be a perfect tip. You're going to have some that maybe break off, that fold under. Next, to establish the center a little bit more, I'm going to grab some of that phthalo green. And I didn't rinse off my brush because it's going to mix in a little bit. And I'm just going to call that out just a little bit more. Notice how it darkens the area up here without using brown or black. And then I'm going to blend it in with some of these other petals. Start adding some dimension to it. I'm going to add in the phthalo green to the one on the background. And grab some of the red and kind of blend it in a little bit. Notice how I'm playing in a lot of the darks right now. We want to build our painting up to the lights. What I'm doing now is I just grab some of this cerulean blue and I'm adding some reflective light. I'm just kind of pulling down some of that green into the stem. Some of the phthalo green. And I'll mix in a little bit of the pistachio with that green. And I've got this one down here to do too. Notice how I'm taking the paintbrush, I'm starting it wide and twisting it up to a point. That's how you can get some of these points. That's one of the reasons I really like the flat brushes. Okay, and the phthalo green for the dark spots. So I can start calling out those ones that I want in the middle, the petals. And I can start calling out where it hits the bottom and comes up. Now I'm going to add a little bit of that red into the shadow down below. And I'm going to go back and add some of the phthalo green under here for our shadow. And I'm going to add in some of that phthalo green into our vase too. Because if you guys stare at a vase long enough, you'll start seeing some of the other colors from everything around it in the vase. I'm still using that phthalo green. Now one of the things I'm going to do is mix some of the phthalo green and that crimson red. And what it does is it makes a really deep, almost black color here. And I'm going to put that under here. And under here. So we get our shadow. And I can bring it up into the flower to start getting that soft edge. And inside the flower. Then I'm going to take some of that same color. So notice how I'm just moving around the painting and adding in the color that I have on my brush where I think I would see it. And how you think you would see it, you really just need to think about where the light's coming from and fill in the color based on that. Okay, now I'm going to start adding in some of our lights into the flowers. For the light, I'm going to use some of that permanent rose and a little bit of the white, just like that. wipe off just a little bit. I almost painted on the wrong one. They're starting to look pretty similar. Okay, so now I'm just thinking about the highlights. Where do I want my highlights to be? Grab some of the white. Kind of rounding out the center a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to take some of the cadmium red hue and add some really bright spots to it. And I'm going to mix that in with some of the white that I have there. Add some in the center. I'm going to go back and forth to the crimson so I can blend in the highlights and the lowlights. Still pulling out some of the lowlights there. Key is just to keep it blending, and as long as it's wet, it's going to keep blending. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is mess with this one, and this one in the same manner. Using the cadmium red, the white, and the permanent rose. And I'm going to do a couple soft edges here, kind of blend it in with the background. And what I did was just took white, and I'm doing very light brush strokes over it. Way to erase is just add water on a clean brush and erase. One of the things about the alizarin crimson is it's very translucent, so with enough water it'll really kind of allow the other colors to shine through. Okay, now I'm going to pull some of the same color down into my vase here, because everything reflects. Take some of that off. And I'm really doing a very dry brush, so it just gives a hint of the color. One thing to keep in mind is that, you know, the jars that go, they have a line that go around like that, so you screw the top on. So I'm just kind of making a hint of those lines in here. And then I'm going over it, over some of these spots, so it really makes the stem sit back. Okay. And with a wet brush, I can blend it in a little bit more. And again, it makes it a little more translucent too by adding water. So it really makes the stuff behind it shine through. Okay, now I'm going to grab, for a little more interest, some of that pistachio color. And I'm going to pull some of the pistachio into my flowers up here so it adds harmony to the whole painting. And then I'm going to continue to play in the pistachio down in my glass jar. So I'm just adding touches of highlights with the pistachio. And I'm also going to use the pistachio to start putting in the little dots. And notice how I'm using the edge of my brush. Again, that's one of the reasons why I really like the square brushes. Okay, now I'm going to take some of that pistachio and start bringing it into my water and the glass jar. Same thing I did with the blue. I wet my brush a little bit and I'm going to blend it in just a little bit. Okay, one of the things I did there that was very subtle was I took the pistachio and notice how I brought it over the stems, but that doesn't make sense in the real world because the back of the glass is going to be behind the stems. So all I did was take my finger and wiped it out. Use the tools that you have. Alright, now I'm going to take in some of those whites and really call them out just a little bit more. Okay, now with a wet brush, I'm going to blend that. Notice how I'm kind of going down. And I'm thinking about the water. So the water is going to stop here. So we kind of want to set those back just a little bit. And let's set that one back. I don't know if you guys can hear the noise downstairs. That's my vacuum cleaner, a needle robot thingy. Thing's awesome. Allows me to paint. Okay, now I'm gonna enhance the edge here. It's too hard. So I'm going to take some of my cerulean blue, a little bit of phthalo blue, and start making that a little softer down here. And some water, of course. I'm going to add some of that color back in here. And maybe a touch here to reflect it. Touch up here. Add a little color. Take some of that pistachio and the phthalo. And doing some X marks with some water. So this blends a little bit more. And switch to the big brush. Just with some water on it. Because I have green down here, I'm going to add a touch of it up here. And just a couple more little highlights. And I think we can call it done. Switching back to the smaller brush, grabbing some of the white, and make a hard highlight here. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same with some of the white and pistachio up into the flower up here. I did that because every now and then you have white that shines through and leaves a little more reflective type shadow. So I'm doing a little more contour to some of this. Get that hard edge. And yep, I think I'm done. Alright. So if you have any questions, just feel free to email me, Stephanie@grinninglikeanidiot.com. And if you have any suggestions for additional paintings, feel free to also email me or post something on my Facebook, facebook.com/grinninglikeanidiot. And I'll be sure to add it to the list of requests of paintings to do. All right. Thanks, guys. Have fun.